We've all been to school. We feel like we know it inside and out. But what if I told you the whole system, from the desks to the bells to the very shape of the building, is all based on a kind of hidden blueprint? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on why our modern schools were built the way they were. And it all kicks off with this really strange puzzle. Have you ever thought about this? A classroom in Tokyo, one in Rio, one in Des Moines, they all look, well, pretty much the same. It's kind of weird, right? How in the world did that happen? Was it just some big coincidence? Well, as it turns out, no, it was no accident at all. This global cookie-cutter design was completely intentional, built for a very specific purpose in a very specific time. And that, of course, leads to the much bigger question for us. Does that original purpose make any sense at all today? So let's get into it. Where did this global school blueprint actually come from? To really understand the classroom you and I know, we've got to go back to the moment it was first invented. Researcher Yusuf Progler, he describes this standard model in, let's say, some pretty blunt terms. He calls it a box-shaped concrete building resembling a factory, divided into smaller boxes called classrooms. Ouch. I mean, it's not the most inspiring description, but if you're being honest, he's not totally wrong, is he? It's like this standardized kit of parts that you find everywhere. You've got the boxy building, all the desks facing the front, the blackboard, the clock on the wall. Then you add in the national flags, the bells that chop up the day into these neat 50-minute blocks, and all the kids sorted by age. This isn't random. It's a formula. And you have to understand, this formula wasn't designed to spark creativity or nurture individual curiosity. Nope. It was engineered with a laser-like focus to serve the very specific needs of a completely different time, the 19th century. And here they are, the two masters that the modern school system was built to serve: industrialization and nationalism. The whole entire structure was designed to produce two very specific things: disciplined factory workers and obedient, loyal citizens. And when you put them side by side, the connection is just, wow, it's impossible to miss. Factories needed workers to be on time, so schools got bells. Factories needed people who could handle repetitive tasks for hours, so schools focused on rote memorization. Efficiency was key, so you get standardized schedules for everyone. Even the classic 8 to 3 school day was perfect training for withstanding long hours on the assembly line. School was literally a training ground for the factory. Now, here's the crazy part. This system was incredibly good at what it was designed to do. It worked. The only problem, the world it was built for, well, it doesn't exist anymore. You can actually watch its whole life cycle play out. It starts in 19th century Europe, and then in the early 20th century, it spreads like wildfire all over the globe. By the middle of the century, boom, it's the global standard. But then you get to the late 20th century, and that's the turning point. The world changes. Global corporations, global media, they start to become way more powerful than the nation states the system was built to support. And that right there is the fundamental disconnect we're living with. The economy changed, culture changed, technology completely changed everything. But that classroom blueprint, it's basically been frozen in time. We're trying to prepare 21st century kids with a system built for the 19th century. So, this brings us to a much deeper and honestly, a much more personal question. If the whole system's original purpose is obsolete, then what is the purpose of a student in that system? The structural problem has now become a full-blown philosophical crisis. Think about it. If the goal isn't just to churn out factory workers and patriotic citizens anymore, then what is the goal? What are we trying to do? This is the central fight in education today, and believe me, nobody agrees on the answer. In fact, you've got these completely different philosophies battling it out. Is a student an essentialist future employee who just needs job skills? Or are they a critical theory revolutionary meant to tear down and rebuild society? Are they a perennialist, just there to absorb the great ideas of the past? Or a progressivist, learner whose personal interests should drive everything? We can't even agree on the basic definition of what a student is for. And one of the key critiques in the source material argues that this conflict leads to a really disturbing place. A lot of these powerful, modern views, they don't really see the student as a person, not as an individual human being to be developed for their own sake. Instead, they see the student as a means to an end, a tool, a resource, something to be molded and used to achieve somebody else's goal. For example, one view, which is kind of an updated version of that old factory model, sees the student as a future cog in the economic machine.
Another view might see that same student as a future foot soldier for a particular social or political revolution.
And this really forces you to ask a tough question. In either of those scenarios, is that student being treated like a human being who has value just because they exist? Or are they just being used as a tool for someone else's agenda, whether that agenda is economic or political? Okay, so we've looked at the history, we've touched on the philosophy. It's time to put it all together and ask the big one. What is school actually for now in our world? At the end of the day, we're left staring down two massive challenges. First, there's the structural problem. We're stuck using an old, outdated blueprint for a world that is long gone. And second, the philosophical problem. Because that old purpose disappeared, we're now just fighting with each other about what the purpose of a student even is. The bottom line is pretty simple and a little scary. We've inherited this huge, powerful global system that has completely lost its original mission, and we haven't found a new one to take its place. Which really brings this whole question back to you. We've seen why the old school was built the way it was. We've seen why that design is causing so many problems today. So if you were the architect, if you had a totally blank slate to design an education for today's world, what would its purpose be? What would you build?